There is a certain type of person who never seems rattled. You've definitely seen them. Someone says something harsh, twists a story, or tests them right in front of a crowd, and they just remain completely steady, almost untouchable, while everyone else reacts. They carry this quiet strength. It's a calm that doesn't demand attention, but completely commands it. This isn't luck, and it's not a skill learned overnight. It is a deliberate choice rooted in understanding that true power doesn't come from controlling the world around you, but from mastering the world within. Here at Mind Stoic Official, we recognize this mastery over oneself as the truest form of freedom. The ability to remain unshaken, even when chaos surrounds you. Every reaction we give hands a map of our weaknesses to the world. Every pause, every measured breath, and every moment of stillness reclaims it. There is a rare clarity in living this way, a way of moving through life that draws respect, insight, and subtle influence without a single word spoken. Choosing calm over reaction isn't just a strategy, it is personal sovereignty. It is an alignment of action with reason rather than impulse. Your presence becomes a lens through which you perceive intention, patterns, and the currents of behavior around you. Walking through life in this way isn't just about endurance. It is about insight, discernment, and awareness exercised with quiet authority. Calmness allows you to act from reason, to observe without being swept up in the heat of the moment, and to navigate every challenge with measured judgment. This isn't suppression or detachment. It is the deliberate cultivation of a strength that cannot be taken or diluted by circumstance. Each choice to remain steady reinforces the mind, shapes perception, and transforms vulnerability into a foundation for influence. The moment someone tries to humiliate you in front of others, the weight of their laughter can feel almost physical, pressing down on your chest, making your pulse quicken, and scrambling your thoughts. Every instinct urges you to respond, to justify yourself, and to reclaim the dignity they are attempting to strip away. Yet, that very reaction is exactly the leverage they seek. The crowd isn't listening to your words, they are watching your reaction. If your voice trembles, or if your expression betrays discomfort, you hand them exactly what they hoped for, proof of vulnerability. We believe that external events, including ridicule, hold no inherent power over the mind. The harm of the insult exists only in the judgment you attach to it, and in the value you assign to their attempt to destabilize you. The mastery lies in observing the moment, without surrendering to its pressure, and in maintaining an internal equilibrium that cannot be shaken by the noise around you. Stillness is not absence, it is deliberate awareness. Through a steady presence, you reclaim authority, and in that calm, the provocateur's power completely dissolves. Silence becomes both your shield and your message. Others may perceive it as strength, but it is far more. It is agency exercised from within, a refusal to be dictated by external drama. Standing firm transforms potential weakness into quiet resilience, demonstrating that influence emerges from composure rather than confrontation. As you maintain this measured presence, you begin to notice subtle shifts in those around you. The individual who sought to provoke realizes their attempt has failed, their confidence faltering, and their movements carrying traces of frustration or desperation. The reactions of others become data, revealing intentions, insecurities, and priorities without a word being spoken. It is not about domination or retaliation. It is about reclaiming the space in which you exist and conducting yourself according to principles rather than reflexive impulses. You cannot govern the actions of others, but you can govern your own judgments, your choices, and your composure. By holding steady, you create a space that cannot be unsettled, a presence that carries weight without force. Observers who anticipated a reactive display instead encounter a calm anchor, and their perceptions shift naturally. The energy that once sought to destabilize you often redirects back upon itself, revealing patterns and inconsistencies in those around you. Influence emerges not through argument or persuasion, but through the quiet, consistent demonstration of internal stability. Composure is its own signal of authority, and over time, it establishes a standard of conduct that others recognize intuitively. remaining unshaken in the face of ridicule develops true resilience. Each time you resist the urge to react impulsively, to validate the provocateur, or to defend yourself unnecessarily, you reinforce a neural pattern favoring reasoned engagement over reflexive emotion. Your decisions become clearer, your judgment sharper, and your capacity to act from principle stronger. This internal rhythm of calm begins to influence not only immediate interactions, but broader patterns of behavior, subtly shaping how others approach, test, or respond to you. The presence of composure itself becomes a deterrent. Attempts to provoke or manipulate lose their potency because you no longer supply the reaction they rely on. Over repeated practice, this calm becomes habitual, a quiet yet formidable presence in any social environment. It signals confidence and autonomy without demanding attention or performance. In these moments, you are not simply surviving external pressure. You are transforming it into a field of perception and influence that others unconsciously navigate according to the stability you maintain. Authority, insight, and clarity all grow from this disciplined mastery of self. If the idea of cultivating that kind of inner strength resonates, consider subscribing to Mind Stoic Official. Subscribing is not just clicking a button, it is a personal step toward deepening the understanding of yourself, toward exercising calm in the moments that matter, and toward strengthening your presence in every interaction. It is a commitment to observing without haste, to acting with reason, and to building a foundation of composure and insight that carries into every part of life. Each time you engage with this practice, and each time you choose stillness over reaction, you are investing in the person you are becoming. Furthermore, the cultivation of calm in moments of public mockery intersects with social perception in meaningful ways. Observers consciously or unconsciously compare reactions, evaluate confidence, and assign value. When one person remains serene while another struggles to maintain composure, the narrative of competence shifts. The provocateur, initially positioned as dominant by their act, is recontextualized by their own reaction to a lack of engagement from the intended target. This shift alters perception without a word being spoken, demonstrating that influence does not rely on assertion, but on presence. Virtue expressed through action aligned with reason carries an inherent authority. Composure in adversity is a practical application of this principle, manifesting as credibility, trust, and subtle leadership in social dynamics. Those who witness such steadiness cannot help but recalibrate their assumptions, and in doing so, they inadvertently grant power to the one who remains unshaken. The act of maintaining inner balance transforms what appears externally as passivity into an active, observable form of strength. The lesson is clear. Influence and respect are more often earned through a controlled response than through overt defense. Even as the moment of mockery fades, the internal consequences of composure persist. The self, having navigated a potential disturbance without surrendering to immediate impulses, accrues confidence, insight, and clarity. Each episode of restraint serves as evidence of capability, both to the individual and to those around them. Over time, the repeated practice of a measured response builds a psychological and philosophical foundation upon which future interactions are framed. One becomes known not for the provocations encountered, but for the stability maintained in their presence. This quiet reputation precedes engagement, shaping interactions before a single word is exchanged. Others approach with an awareness of your unshakable steadiness, and their behavior adjusts accordingly, often revealing their intentions, insecurities, and priorities without the need for explicit confrontation. The cycle of influence thus becomes cumulative, reinforcing the internal principle that mastery over oneself is both protective and generative. Every moment of calm is a deliberate act of self-sovereignty, transforming potential vulnerability into enduring authority. Ultimately, the power derived from maintaining composure in public mockery resides not in denying emotion, but in mastering it. The mind governs the interpretation of external events, meaning that judgment, rather than circumstance, dictates your suffering or your strength by consistently choosing stillness. One cultivates an inner citadel, resistant to the turbulence of social pressure. Each encounter and each challenge becomes an opportunity to exercise agency, testing and reinforcing the capacity for reasoned action. The provocateur's intention, aimed entirely at disruption, is rendered completely inert. As a result, the broader social context aligns subtly with the individual, who has learned to anchor themselves in awareness rather than impulse. This practice, repeated and refined, does more than just preserve dignity. It actively shapes perception, molds influence, and strengthens the mind's resilience. The lesson here is both enduring and practical. Composure is not merely a response, it is a strategy. It is an embodiment of insight and a pathway to mastery over the self, as well as over the subtle currents of human interaction that define much of daily life. The sudden shift of someone from quiet opposition to apparent support can feel like a massive relief, a softening of the tension that had been building without your conscious awareness. It is incredibly tempting to respond with openness, letting gratitude or relief guide your words and gestures. But that very impulse is the exact doorway through which subtle manipulation often enters. Here at Mind Stoic Official, we encourage a pause, a deliberate measure between perception and reaction. This reminds us that external appearances rarely tell the full story. Trust is not an automatic response to convenience or timing. It is the product of careful observation, of watching patterns unfold over time, and of understanding motives beyond what is immediately visible. When someone changes their behavior toward you, it is rarely a spontaneous act of loyalty. There is always a reason, a shift in circumstance, or an adjustment in their own calculations that prompts this outward expression of alignment. By meeting such gestures with measured awareness rather than emotional acceptance, you preserve the clarity and autonomy that are central to influence and composure. The mind that can observe without immediately engaging gains access to the subtle currents of intention that most people completely overlook. This form of observation is not passive. It is a disciplined practice. It is a way to see the landscape of human behavior without becoming enmeshed in the surface-level drama. Each encounter becomes an opportunity to refine discernment, helping you understand not only the people around you, but also the principles by which you choose to navigate their actions. In this space of attentive calm, you notice the small, telling behaviors that might otherwise escape awareness. The half smile, the measured tone, or the specific timing of their agreement. All of these convey critical information about underlying motivations that words alone may obscure. A sudden ally often reveals far more in what is implied than in what is explicitly stated, and the observer who remains composed gains the massive advantage of perspective. There is a major distinction between responding warmly and revealing vulnerability, between extending civility and offering total access to your inner intentions. Genuine discipline encourages the former and cautions heavily against the latter. By maintaining a measured presence, you allow the person to express their alignment while completely withholding the interior knowledge that could become leverage if revealed prematurely. This restraint is not indifference, it is strategic engagement. It is a way to participate in the social landscape with integrity, while avoiding unnecessary exposure to manipulation. Time becomes a tool, not a threat. Observing how intentions manifest over days, weeks, and months allows for a much fuller understanding of reliability and character. Immediate reactions, however comforting they might be, often obscure the subtleties that determine whether allegiance is genuine or purely circumstantial. By waiting, watching, and calibrating your own behavior to measured observation rather than fleeting relief, you cultivate an insight that strengthens future interactions and drastically reduces the risk of deception. The dynamics of sudden alignment illustrate a deeper principle. Clarity and composure are themselves forms of power. When you do not rush to reciprocate perceived goodwill, and when you maintain an evenness of demeanor, you assert a subtle authority over the social environment. Others are compelled to reveal more of themselves as they adapt to your steadiness, often without even realizing that their disclosures are shaping the perceptions you hold and the decisions you will make. This is not coercion. It is the natural consequence of presence, attentiveness, and restraint. The more conscious your choices are in these moments, the more nuanced your understanding of relational patterns becomes. The act of withholding immediate acceptance or revealing measured responses becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the other person's intentions, but also your own mastery over impulse and expectation. Through this process, you refine your judgment and cultivate a psychological environment in which observation and understanding guide decisions, rather than emotion or habit. The calm mind can pick up on subtle cues, distinguish between authentic cooperation and opportunistic behavior, and anticipate the trajectories of relationships with incredible precision. Each measured interaction adds depth to your capacity for insight, demonstrating that influence is often a function of discernment rather than force, and that real authority emerges through consistency and self-governance. Remaining observant while engaging selectively also fosters a profound internal equilibrium. The temptation to react immediately with gratitude, affirmation, or alignment is entirely natural, yet yielding to it without reflection can easily create a dependency on external validation. Real resilience and autonomy arise from the recognition that external actions, whether supportive or oppositional, are entirely neutral until judged by the mind. By observing without surrendering to impulse, you maintain internal standards, ensuring that your decisions remain aligned with reason rather than fluctuating circumstances. This internal discipline preserves your autonomy, allowing actions to be deliberate and not reactive. As you navigate relationships, the interplay between observation and action sharpens, forming a powerful feedback loop where insight, patience, and selective engagement reinforce one another. Over time, this practice strengthens your capacity to discern authenticity, anticipate outcomes, and navigate social complexity with total composure. It is in these measured interactions that subtle influence is exercised most effectively, not through overt assertion, but through a quiet presence that others instinctively respect and respond to, often revealing their own intentions in the process. In practical terms, maintaining this form of calm requires a definitive shift in perception from immediate emotional gratification to long-term strategic awareness. The momentary satisfaction of reciprocating apparent goodwill must always be weighed against the insights gained by restraint and attentive observation. Each choice to remain measured and to speak with kindness without revealing interior knowledge reinforces a cognitive framework that prioritizes clarity, discernment, and the preservation of agency. The mind trained in this manner becomes highly adept at navigating the nuances of shifting allegiances, identifying patterns of consistency or opportunism, and responding with reasoned action rather than reflexive emotion. The capacity to act with insight rather than impulsive trust shapes the social environment subtly yet decisively, allowing the individual to influence outcomes through presence rather than performance. This approach aligns perfectly with the foundational principle that control resides entirely within. The apparent gestures of others are not sources of strength or vulnerability until they are interpreted through your own mind. By exercising patience and measured engagement, you develop a form of psychological leverage grounded in understanding rather than reaction, and insight rather than force. Furthermore, the interplay between calm observation and selective engagement cultivates deep credibility and reliability. When you consistently respond with measured attentiveness, others learn to anticipate a stable, principled demeanor rather than emotional volatility. The reliability of such a presence becomes a firm reference point within the social landscape, shaping expectations, reducing uncertainty, and guiding interactions with subtle authority. This dynamic is not constructed through explicit demonstration, but emerges naturally from repeated practice. Each episode reinforces the internal framework of discipline, observation, and restraint. By refraining from immediate validation or unguarded alignment, you maintain access to critical information, discern motives more clearly, and exercise true influence through strategic patience. The long-term impact of these interactions is the establishment of a powerful reputation for insight, discernment, and steady judgment. In turn, this naturally shapes the behavior and perceptions of those around you, completely eliminating the need for overt assertion or confrontation. Influence, in this sense, is the direct product of consistent internal governance, manifesting externally through calm engagement. Patience and a measured response also serve to drastically reduce your vulnerability to manipulation. A sudden alignment by another person often carries implicit expectations, hidden pressures, or subtle attempts to extract concessions from you. By maintaining your composure and withholding premature trust, you protect both your psychological integrity and your strategic autonomy. Vulnerability is never eliminated by running away or withdrawing. It is managed through conscious choice and self-discipline. Recognizing the complex layers of motive and circumstance that drive sudden shifts allows you to navigate interactions without ever compromising your principles or conceding undue influence. Here at Mind Stoic Official, we view each encounter as an exercise in discernment, a test of your capacity to observe, evaluate, and act in perfect alignment with reason. The repeated practice of measured engagement strengthens both your self-confidence and your situational awareness. This forms a resilient framework that guides your decision-making, shapes how you perceive the world, and cultivates an influence grounded in clarity rather than reaction. Ultimately, the practice of observing sudden allies with calm attentiveness reinforces a broader pattern of psychological and social mastery. It proves that authority and influence are derived less from the overt assertion of your will and far more from the disciplined management of yourself and your perception. By engaging selectively, maintaining measured responses, and prioritizing observation over immediate emotional reaction, you cultivate a form of social insight that is subtle, durable, and highly effective. Each interaction becomes a vital building block in the architecture of your presence, refining your judgment, enhancing your discernment, and establishing an unspoken authority that others recognize over time. This practice develops a mental clarity and composure that is never contingent on external validation, but instead arises from a consistent alignment with reasoned principles. In this way, managing a sudden alignment becomes both a practical strategy and a deep philosophical exercise. It reinforces the core ideal that true power and influence originate entirely from within, manifested externally through patience, observation, and self-governed action. On the flip side, the sensation of being ignored carries a weight that is much more subtle than outright opposition, yet it can often cut deeper than a direct insult. The air feels colder, the space between you and others seems to stretch, and an unspoken dismissal vibrates just beneath the surface of the conversation. In those exact moments, your natural instinct is to fill the gap, to make yourself visible through louder words, exaggerated gestures, or an excessive demonstration of your competence. It is a reflexive, desperate attempt to assert your presence where the environment appears to deny it. Yet, such reactions are precisely the behaviors that perpetuate the imbalance. They hand the exact attention you are craving over to those who are watching you scramble. A highly counterintuitive approach is required here. The absence of external acknowledgement does not equate to a loss of your worth, nor does it demand immediate compensation. Validation, when pursued as an external commodity, is always fleeting and often deceptive. The only assessment that truly endures is the one made through reasoned judgment, the internal metric by which your actions, intentions, and character are weighed. When you withdraw that frantic energy from the expectation of recognition, you are not retreating. You are consolidating your authority. By anchoring your mind and body in purpose rather than in reaction, you shape the field of influence without saying a word. The space that others assume they control suddenly becomes one where your composure directs attention subtly, like a still lake reflecting clarity amidst surrounding turbulence. By choosing presence over performance, you establish a rhythm in which your actions are informed entirely by principle rather than impulse. This is not indifference. It is a disciplined allocation of your energy that prioritizes meaningful engagement over a reactionary display. The human tendency to chase attention is ancient, rooted deeply in the need for social affirmation and survival. Yet, it is completely counterproductive in modern interactions, where the scarcity of acknowledgement actually defines its value. By consciously refraining from participating in that chase, you completely invert the expected dynamics. Those who sought to diminish your influence through omission are suddenly confronted with an unanticipated constancy. Your composure itself becomes a form of quiet assertion, signaling that your value is entirely self-contained. Attention and focus are not commodities to be negotiated. Observers who had anticipated a response are left to fill the silence, and in doing so, they reveal far more of their own priorities, insecurities, or intentions. The paradox of strategic withdrawal is that by appearing scarce, your presence gains incredible weight. The scarcity created is not found in your absence, but in a deliberate, reasoned allocation of your energy, a direct reflection of an internal standard that does not fluctuate with the whims of external acknowledgement. The mind that can withstand neglect without succumbing to a frantic display gains a subtle authority, a psychological leverage born from discipline rather than performance. This approach also cultivates an acute awareness of relational dynamics. The moments of being overlooked are often charged with critical information that is easy to miss when you are consumed by an immediate reaction. Observing how others behave when attention is withheld allows for a richer understanding of hierarchy, intention, and influence. People reveal their true patterns in the absence of overt interaction, and the practiced eye easily discerns nuances of motive and alignment. The act of remaining calm, centered, and intentionally reserved grants you the rare ability to map the social environment with a clarity that those who react impulsively can rarely achieve. Every ignored remark and every overlooked contribution carries embedded cues. By refusing to chase validation, you begin to see the deeper layers beneath surface-level interactions. This is not an exercise in withdrawal for its own sake, but in strategic attentiveness. Here at Mind Stoic Official, we look to the core teachings of self-mastery as the foundation for any meaningful interaction. When the self is governed strictly by principle and reason, the apparent slights of others completely lose their ability to destabilize you. The power resides entirely in your capacity to observe fully, to interpret accurately, and to act deliberately when appropriate, rather than being swept into a vortex of reflexive motion. There is also a profound psychological dimension to this practice. When attention is withheld from you, the urge to perform is often overwhelming because it touches on a deep-seated desire for acknowledgement and inclusion. The mind naturally interprets this omission as a direct threat to your status, relevance, or belonging, triggering physiological responses that manifest as agitation, anxiety, or a desperate compulsion to prove your worth. True philosophy teaches us that these impulses, though entirely natural, are not commands to act. They are simply signals to exercise your power of reason and choice. By recognizing the transient, temporary nature of external evaluation, and by choosing to redirect your energy toward actions aligned with purpose, you reinforce your self-governance. The internal standard becomes your absolute source of stability, making the external environment far less capable of eliciting reactive behavior from you. Over time, the repeated practice of sustaining composure under neglect heavily strengthens your cognitive and emotional resilience. You become less reactive to omission, more capable of discerning genuine opportunity, and increasingly able to guide interactions with clarity and intention. Presence, in this sense, is both your shield and your instrument. It protects you from unnecessary agitation and exerts massive influence through the subtle assertion of steadiness. In addition, the cultivation of calm under omission fosters a form of psychological autonomy that extends far beyond immediate interactions. The repeated exercise of self-regulation in the face of social invisibility trains the mind to differentiate between transient social signals and enduring value. As Epictetus famously observed, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Each moment of restraint reinforces the understanding that personal worth is derived entirely from internal alignment, not from the acknowledgement of others. This internal consistency shapes your behavior across diverse contexts, drastically reducing your susceptibility to manipulation, distraction, and emotional reactivity. By embedding this principle in your daily practice, you gain a form of influence that is completely self-reinforcing. Steady engagement, informed observation, and the selective allocation of your attention collectively create an aura of authority that others unconsciously respect. The timeless lesson is evident. True power is never given by the crowd, it is claimed from within. External conditions do not dictate inner stability. The disciplined mind determines the interpretation and response to those conditions, transforming potential frustration into a strategic advantage. The act of maintaining calm in the face of being overlooked also reveals a deeper insight about social dynamics. People respond predictably to scarcity and confidence. When someone does not react to omission with desperation, they signal an internal equilibrium that is both attractive and commanding. This is not manipulation, but a natural reflection of composure. Those who attempt to assert influence through neglect encounter a subject whose mind is aligned with principle and purpose. The result is a subtle realignment of relational dynamics, where attention and influence are drawn to steadiness rather than volatility. The psychological effect extends beyond the immediate actors, shaping the broader social environment in ways that reinforce both respect and credibility. This practice of strategic non-engagement becomes a tool for cultivating presence, authority, and insight without explicit assertion, allowing the individual to navigate complex social landscapes with confidence and discernment. Ultimately, the choice to remain composed when ignored strengthens both internal governance and external perception. The foundational principle that control resides within is demonstrated in practice. By observing without reacting impulsively, the individual maintains clarity, preserves energy, and exerts subtle influence. The moments of omission, rather than diminishing authority, provide the perfect opportunity to demonstrate self-possession, strategic insight, and psychological resilience. Over time, the cumulative effect of these practices establishes a pattern of interaction in which steadiness commands attention, curiosity replaces control, and internal discipline shapes external outcomes. The capacity to maintain purpose and composure in the absence of acknowledgement is both a safeguard and a mechanism for influence. Here at Mind Stoic Official, we emphasize this enduring lesson. The true measure of authority lies not in the reactions of others, but in the consistency and intentionality of one's own mind. Shifting focus to another challenge, falsehoods spread quickly, faster than a single response can travel. A story told in whispers or exaggerated for effect seems to gather momentum on its own, creating ripples that you cannot immediately control. Your initial impulse is to intervene, to clarify, to correct, and to set the record straight in hopes of reclaiming influence. It is a completely natural reaction. The mind instinctively recoils at misrepresentation, especially when framed in a way that undermines credibility or intention. Yet, a different path relies not on reactive force, but on deliberate composure. Truth, when paired with steady awareness, carries an authority completely independent of the noise surrounding it. Panic, defensiveness, and the need for immediate resolution only amplify the very rumor one seeks to contain. Each hurried explanation feeds the fire, lending urgency and importance to something that initially might have been fleeting or unconsidered. Calm, in contrast, acts like water on a spark, suffocating the flames without drawing attention to the act itself. In this space of measured steadiness, influence emerges not from argumentation, but from the evidence of self-control, which observers register intuitively. People constantly assess far more than just the content of a story. They evaluate the demeanor, the confidence, and the poise of the individual at the center. Maintaining equilibrium conveys that the narrative, regardless of its distortion, cannot destabilize the one it concerns. This composure is an unspoken declaration of inner authority, signaling that external opinion holds limited power over reasoned judgment. As the falsehood circulates, the ability to withhold a reactive explanation allows you to observe the environment more clearly. Who repeats the story without verification? Who adds embellishments? Who seeks to benefit from the perception of chaos? Each interaction and each repetition reveals the structure of influence surrounding the rumor. By remaining unshaken, you gain clarity not only about the story itself, but about the social dynamics in which it travels. There is a massive subtlety in allowing others to reveal themselves through their handling of information. A rushed reaction obscures these patterns, drawing attention to your response rather than to the behaviors and intentions of those around you. Composure transforms observation into understanding. By choosing to act with patience and precision rather than emotional urgency, you gather insight that strengthens both your perception and your future decisions. The more measured your engagement, the more authority your presence communicates. And the more others are compelled to interpret your actions through the lens of stability rather than volatility. In this way, the act of holding steady functions as both your defense and your influence, a quiet power that operates beautifully beneath the surface of overt conflict. A measured response to falsehood requires deep discipline in both thought and speech. We must remember that judgment, not circumstance, defines our perception and reaction. Words spoken in haste, driven purely by the desperate need to prove correctness, rarely convey control or authority. In contrast, a carefully considered statement delivered without visible agitation or urgency communicates not only the truth, but also complete mastery over one's own emotional terrain. The content of the message often matters less than the demeanor with which it is expressed. Others are incredibly sensitive to the interplay between assertion and composure. Even the most subtle cues, your tone, your pacing, and the total absence of agitation, signal a form of authority that resonates far beyond the specific context of the rumor. By framing your responses with deliberate care, you reinforce an internal standard of reasoned action. This approach is less about controlling external narratives and much more about the cultivation of influence through personal equilibrium. When the mind remains firmly anchored, external disturbances simply cannot dictate the quality of your judgment or the clarity of your expression. The story, no matter how widely circulated, is filtered through your presence, which consistently communicates confidence, steadiness, and insight. Authority emerges from this perfect alignment between action and principle, demonstrating that composure itself can serve as the primary arbiter of credibility. Holding your ground in the face of falsehood also completely reshapes the perceptions of those who witness the exchange indirectly. Observers are constantly interpreting not only the events themselves, but the raw reactions of those involved. A person who appears rattled instantly amplifies the weight of the rumor, signaling to the environment that it merits attention and possibly judgment. Conversely, an individual who maintains absolute composure communicates that external chatter does not define reality, that the core of their character is never subject to transient, temporary opinion. This steadiness fosters a deep, subtle influence, guiding perception without any overt intervention. Those who seek to manipulate or distort information often depend entirely on eliciting a visible disruption from you. By remaining anchored, you completely remove the mechanism by which that falsehood gains traction. Influence, in this sense, is exercised through presence rather than argument, and through example rather than contestation. The demonstration of equanimity becomes a powerful signal that commands respect, reassures your allies, and completely recalibrates the expectations of observers. Through consistent practice, composure becomes a strategic tool that shapes perception, even when direct engagement is minimal or entirely absent. There is also a massive cumulative effect in resisting the urge to respond hastily. Each moment of steady observation heavily reinforces patterns of mental resilience and perceptual clarity. The individual learns to distinguish clearly between immediate provocation and long-term consequence, between mere appearances that demand attention and the true reality of a situation, and those that do not. Over time, this repeated exercise builds a highly reliable internal metric for assessing situations, allowing for a discernment that is both swift and measured. The mind develops the brilliant ability to anticipate outcomes, gauge intentions, and select exact moments for intervention that maximize your effect while minimizing unnecessary exposure or agitation. This disciplined approach heavily reduces your vulnerability to manipulation and vastly enhances your capacity for strategic engagement. It cultivates an intuitive understanding of human behavior, where patterns of reaction and projection easily reveal themselves through consistency and repetition. Composure is not merely defensive, it is an incredible tool for observation, insight, and influence. It allows you to operate effectively within any social landscape without ever surrendering your autonomy to the fluctuations of rumor or opinion. Falsehoods, when met with measured calm, also serve as an ultimate test of character and presence. They create an environment where those who are reactive immediately reveal their own vulnerabilities, while those who maintain composure demonstrate absolute stability. Each interaction under such conditions becomes a subtle examination of discipline and influence. The unshakable individual communicates massive strength without ever needing to assert it verbally. This creates an impression of authority that is internally consistent and externally recognized, reinforcing both your credibility and your social presence. Observers, including your allies and even neutral parties, gain deep insight into the character of the composed individual, often perceiving reliability, strategic foresight, and emotional resilience. The sheer social weight of steadiness can completely outweigh the superficial impact of false narratives, illustrating perfectly that true influence is a function of presence rather than argument. By cultivating this approach consistently, you build a durable form of respect and authority that transcends any momentary circumstance. The strategy of a calm response also encourages a much broader perspective. Here at Mind Stoic Official, we constantly emphasize the separation between what is within our control and what lies completely beyond it. Rumors, distortions, and the perceptions of others are things you cannot directly control. What you can control is your own judgment, your demeanor, and your explicit choice of action. By internalizing this core principle, you shift your focus from the reactive management of appearances to the proactive cultivation of your presence. Each decision and each moment of restraint reinforces an internal standard that informs all subsequent behavior. Over time, the practice develops a stable psychological framework in which composure becomes completely habitual. Your influence becomes subtle yet pervasive, allowing you to navigate complex social dynamics with increasing clarity and effectiveness. The power of calm in this context derives entirely from its consistency and its ability to shape perception indirectly, creating a field of influence that is highly resilient to the distortions of rumor. Ultimately, the practice of responding to falsehoods with measured composure transforms potential vulnerability into a massive strategic advantage. It proves that credibility, influence, and authority are not solely functions of argument or loud correction, but are grounded deeply in the demonstration of steadiness. Observers perceive not only the facts of the situation, but the resilience and clarity of the person standing at its center. Each instance of calm engagement strengthens your capacity to navigate complex social interactions, enhances your ability to discern intention and motive, and reinforces the internal standard by which your judgment is exercised. Through disciplined restraint, deep insight, and deliberate action, you cultivate a presence that commands respect, mitigates the impact of misinformation, and beautifully embodies the timeless principle that true control resides within. In the quiet authority of composure, influence and stability gracefully converge, revealing that strength lies not in the reactive correction of external circumstances, but in the deliberate governance of self and perception. Now, switching gears to a different dynamic. Some people move through life as if searching for openings, quietly assessing, waiting for the moment to probe. Their goal is rarely kindness or connection, it is information, insight into the gaps, hesitations, and uncertainties that lie beneath the surface. A seemingly casual question, an offhand comment, or even a slight shift in tone can be an instrument of testing, designed to reveal what is hidden. The measure of their success, however, is not in the subtlety of their inquiry, but in the reaction it elicits. The moment you allow your emotions, your defenses, or your impatience to dominate, you reveal exactly what they sought: a vulnerability to exploit, a fracture in composure that can be observed, noted, and potentially leveraged. This is where the core principle becomes vital. Mastery over self is the only reliable form of control. You cannot dictate the curiosity or intentions of another, but you can absolutely govern your own judgments, your own emotional responses, and the interpretation you place on what is presented. In doing so, you transform potential exposure into an opportunity to demonstrate inner stability. The key lies in acknowledging history without attachment, observing past missteps without allowing them to dictate current behavior, and responding with a measured awareness that completely disarms the seeker before they can exert influence. Here at Mind Stoic Official, we know that the true strength of this approach lies in embracing your imperfections openly, without shame or defensive distortion. The experiences you carry, the mistakes you have endured, and the challenges you have faced are not liabilities. They are components of a narrative that, when approached with equanimity, reveal deep resilience rather than weakness. A probing question directed toward a past failure meets no defensive wall, because that wall has been replaced with total self-acceptance. The scar, once a source of potential pain, now functions as a marker of growth, a testament to endurance and an indicator of insight. By holding your story without flinching, and by recounting or acknowledging it without emotional exaggeration or self-condemnation, you completely remove the power that external observers hope to gain. The seeker's instrument, designed to unearth hesitation or shame, encounters instead a calm reflection of experience, an unyielding presence that refuses to yield leverage. This is the quiet strength of practical discipline, the capacity to own one's narrative fully, to transform perceived vulnerabilities into evidence of character, and to allow composure to communicate authority without overt assertion. The environment of probing, once potentially threatening, becomes an arena for demonstrating the perfect alignment between internal reason and external conduct. Observing the seeker's tactics without an immediate response is another critical dimension of strategic mastery. Every subtle shift, every calculated remark, and every attempt to gauge your emotional reaction becomes data, and the composed mind records it all without surrendering an ounce of influence. By maintaining your equilibrium, you create a powerful buffer between action and reaction, allowing for a deliberate response rather than impulsive defensiveness. This approach turns the seeker's strategy right back upon itself. Their probes end up revealing far less about you than they do about their own assumptions, anxieties, and methods. In their effort to map your weaknesses, they encounter a stable, grounded individual who does not concede control over internal judgment. The act of maintaining calm and choosing measured engagement forces a reconsideration of the dynamic in real time. Patterns in questioning, attempts at subtle manipulation, and the timing of challenges all become highly visible without the distortion of reactive emotion. The practiced observer, anchored in true discipline, recognizes these dynamics and navigates them with precision, turning the potential for vulnerability into a masterclass in perception, understanding, and psychological presence. The integration of past experience into present composure reinforces both credibility and influence. True insight emphasizes that history should never imprison the mind, it should inform it. The lessons embedded in prior failures, missteps, and misunderstandings are incredibly valuable, precisely because they allow the individual to anticipate recurring patterns, recognize the motives behind probing, and calibrate responses with intention. When confronted with questions designed to unsettle you, the awareness of your own resilience and the acknowledgement of prior challenges create an internal frame that is completely unshakable. This awareness manifests externally in a calm demeanor that signals massive competence and security. The seeker, expecting disruption or agitation, encounters instead a steadiness that communicates a much deeper command over self and circumstance. The social impact of this practice is subtle yet profound. It establishes a powerful reputation for insight, control, and unflappable judgment that naturally shapes the behavior and perception of those around you. Composure becomes your primary instrument of influence, more persuasive than argument, and more revealing than any assertion. This practice also cultivates a sense of detachment that protects against overinvestment in the perceptions or expectations of others. True wisdom teaches us that external judgments are inherently limited, unreliable, and often misinformed. The seeker's intent, while designed to create exposure, does not determine your actual value or worth. By maintaining this healthy detachment, the mind remains focused purely on reasoned action, weighing evidence, context, and principle, rather than reacting to the manipulation of attention or opinion. Each probing encounter is thus an opportunity to exercise discernment, observing intent, assessing relevance, and choosing whether, how, and when to engage. This exercise strengthens psychological resilience, reinforcing the understanding that influence over oneself is both protective and generative. The probe loses its power not through loud confrontation, but through the consistent practice of presence, reflection, and a measured response. An essential component of this approach is the conscious selection of your response when intervention is actually required. It should be precise, purposeful, and entirely unburdened by emotional urgency. The content of your engagement must serve the broader objective of maintaining authority, clarity, and autonomy. By responding deliberately, you communicate to the world that you act from principle rather than impulse, and from comprehension rather than compulsion. This calibration of action is both a defensive and a strategic measure. It perfectly preserves your internal equilibrium while subtly shaping perception in the external environment. Observers perceive competence not merely in the act of answering, but in the unique quality, timing, and consistency of the response. Through repeated practice, this approach develops a pattern of engagement in which composure itself becomes the primary vehicle of influence. The seeker's intended leverage completely dissolves into a reflection of their own strategies, their own assumptions, and their desperate reliance on the expectation of a reaction. Over time, the repeated application of these principles creates a form of social and psychological mastery that extends far beyond isolated interactions. By consistently embracing vulnerability without defensiveness, observing without immediate reaction, and choosing precise moments for engagement, you cultivate an environment in which influence is exercised through presence rather than coercion. Each probing encounter contributes to a much broader pattern of clarity, credibility, and psychological resilience. The cumulative effect is a rock-solid reputation of stability, insight, and composure that informs all future interactions. Those who attempt to test or manipulate you recognize, consciously or not, that your responses are governed strictly by principle rather than circumstance. Influence, in this sense, arises naturally from consistent self-governance rather than the aggressive pursuit of dominance or attention. The practice of embracing your own story without flinching also completely reshapes the internal landscape of your confidence. By acknowledging past errors without a shred of shame, the mind develops a sense of equanimity that sustains focus and clarity in the present. As Marcus Aurelius famously wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Each moment in which composure is maintained reinforces a neural and cognitive pattern that prioritizes rational action over reactive emotion. This repetition strengthens both awareness and resilience, ensuring that future probes encounter a mind tightly conditioned to steadiness. The scars of prior experience become your greatest tools of insight, markers of endurance, and evidence of competence. They communicate readiness, stability, and authority to both yourself and the observer, transforming past challenges into active instruments of influence and clarity. The seeker, anticipating disruption, confronts instead a controlled, measured, and unshakable presence, which heavily reduces the efficacy of their probing and enhances the perception of your reliability and strength. Ultimately, the ability to navigate probing questions with calm, measured awareness demonstrates that true mastery lies within. Control over internal judgment, clarity of perception, and the choice of measured engagement shape both immediate outcomes and long-term influence. The seeker's intentions, no matter how carefully calculated, are instantly neutralized by the deliberate application of composure, insight, and self-governance. Each encounter reinforces a pattern of psychological presence that informs your reputation, strengthens your resilience, and communicates authority without overt assertion. The timeless principle is completely evident. Power resides entirely in the mind's consistent discipline, and influence arises from the unshakable alignment of perception, judgment, and action. In embracing your own story, acknowledging imperfection, and responding with measured presence, vulnerability becomes strength, exposure becomes insight, and what was intended as leverage becomes a mirror of enduring resilience. Every choice to remain calm, steady, and deliberate shapes not only the way others perceive you, but the way you experience the world. Each moment of restraint and each act of composure is a brick in the foundation of your inner strength, a strength that cannot be taken, borrowed, or diluted by circumstance. Carry it with intention, let it guide your actions, and allow it to quietly influence the spaces you move through. Your presence matters infinitely more than the noise around you, and the mastery of self is the truest power you will ever hold. Take a moment now to explore one of the suggested videos on the screen. Each one will help deepen the practice of presence, insight, and composure in your daily life. Thank you for being a part of Mind Stoic Official and for choosing growth, clarity, and the quiet strength that comes from truly understanding yourself. Your journey continues, and your practice matters.